What's up, gamers? I hope everybody's having a wonderful day today. So, this video is going to be my response to Roadbreach's response, to Brother Nier's response, to Roadbreach's terrible review of Among Us. Now, if that sounds absolutely fucking retarded, well, that's because it is. Even more so because Roadbreach's response to Nier's video came out like, what, 3 months, 4 months after the fact? Which, at the time Nier's response released, Roadbreach actually admitted that he thought it was a good response and that his initial review of Among Us wasn't that good. But then fast forward to late October, where I was streaming Black Ops 6 Zombies because it had just released. Well, actually it was more Black Ops 3 because BO6 was fucking itself. But both Nier and Roadbreach were in my stream chat. Roadbreach made a jab towards Among Us in the stream chat, and it led to Nier and Roadbreach going back and forth with each other in the chat, which apparently pissed off Roadbreach to the point that he eventually just decided to leave my stream chat, and then a few hours later he posted this video, which I just find endlessly fucking hilarious. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that if you do not personally like Among Us, that is perfectly fine, but the problem is, Roadbreach's reasoning for it is absolutely fucking retarded, so let's go ahead and get right into this shit.
Hey everyone, Roadbreach here, and today we're responding to Netherless. Now you may be wondering, didn't he help you when you were getting slandered? Yes, he did do that. But that's not a shield for criticism, especially since he makes several disingenuous arguments throughout this video. Netherless decided to respond to my Among Us review that I made out of spite because I was sick and tired of people singing this game's praises for reasons I'll get into as we get through the video.
Yeah, I just want to point out that this dude literally admitted to making his Among Us review out of spite for the fanbase, just in ever so important detail that shows this dude's mindset throughout this entire video.
Anyway, let's do this.
And today, we are going to be responding to a video from 3 years ago that is a completely horrendous review of the critically acclaimed party game, Among Us.
Okay, I was going to skip further, but I think this statement is kinda ironic. He brings up the fact that the game is critically acclaimed when he criticized me in the past for bringing up critic scores in my ex-Lucas rant. Didn't we agree that critic scores mean nothing when The Last of Us 2 got Game of the Year? So why do critic scores matter now? Oh, right. It's out of spite.
Oh boy, we are off to a fantastic start when you are completely misunderstanding the point of that. Nier is not bringing up the fact that Among Us is critically acclaimed as an argument in favor of the game's quality. He's just bringing it up to describe the game that he's talking about. Unlike you during the ex-Lucas drama who tried bringing up critic scores to defend Astro's Playroom. Big fucking difference.
Among Us was developed by Innersloth and published by Tom Brow, and was released on November 16th, 2018!
We're off to a phenomenal start with Roadbreach using completely unnecessary ear. I had to literally turn down the volume on that part because of how loud it was, just to put into perspective how unnecessarily loud that was. There is no punchline to the ear either, it's just him complaining about how despite the fact Among Us came out in 2018, it gained massive popularity in 2020. And the biggest factor on why Among Us blew up so much in that year is mainly because of the pandemic that year. So yes, Roadbreach is clearly just bitching in this clip for the sake of bitching.
Playing a game where you walk around playing the same shallow selection of minigames ad infinitum in one of the worst years in recorded history sounds like adding insult to injury. Of all the things you could do to keep yourself busy, you choose the video game equivalent of this meme.
Again, I love repetition!
Besides, it's not like there was a drought of multiplayer games to play that year.
And what the fuck does that have to do with what Nier just brought up? He was talking about you making certain parts of your video unnecessarily loud. Regardless of if you think the minigames are repetitive or not, that has nothing to do with what he was talking about. I mean, I think Krillix put it best.
Holy shit, my fucking ears. Loud does not equal funny. Please keep that in mind.
On PC and mobile. This game has been popping up everywhere on social media, with tons of memes, fan art, and fan songs. I've avoided this game for a long time, and personally, I'm sick and tired of seeing it. It just looks like an unremarkable version of Club Penguin.
Bro is really comparing Among Us to Club Penguin? Why? Those are two completely different games from one another. One game is where people went around to socialize with others and play mini games with them. The other is a murder mystery. They are not comparable in the slightest. Even if you are talking about the aesthetics, they don't match in any capacity.
A good point. Taking a look at a screenshot from Club Penguin and Among Us, we can see that Club Penguin uses black outlines prior to its update, whereas Among Us uses color colored outlines. That being said, Club Penguin still looks better due to the fact that the characters have an adequate amount of detail.
And Among Us doesn't? Among Us is going for an art style similar to Flash games from the early 2000s. Meanwhile, the visual design adds perfect clarity so that I can always tell what's going on from a gameplay standpoint. Given those two factors, I'd say Among Us also has an adequate amount of detail. Also, another thing you're forgetting is that Among Us is designed to be run on mobile phones, and adding too much detail would cause the game to run like complete dog shit, especially for people with older phones.
With its cheap-ass presentation.
Cheap-ass presentation, as if Among Us was supposed to look pretty in the first place. Boo-hoo, they went with an incredibly simplistic art style, the same type of art style you'd see in the Henry Stickmin games. Which makes sense because both Among Us and Henry Stickmin were made by the same people. What, you want Among Us to have beautiful graphics in the likes of Death Stranding or something? Give me a break.
No, what I want is an adequate amount of detail, and for people to stop spamming these hideous backpack cunts anywhere and everywhere. Nobody besides you wants to fuck backpacks, I guarantee that.
Projection detected, opinion rejected.
The irony of this statement coming from a self-admitted furry. Also, I'm still waiting to hear your explanation on what you mean by an adequate amount of detail, because like I described earlier, Among Us does have an adequate amount of detail, because so far all you brought up is the fact that Club Penguin had black outlines versus Among Us which had colored outlines, I guess. A clear example here would be greatly appreciated. Also, you're really pissed off about people memeing the game and posting Amogus and the fucking crewmate everywhere. Even if you do find that annoying, which admittedly I found it annoying at first but then it grew on me, you can still very much separate the game from that and judge it on its own merits. I mean, I do that for several games like Dark Souls, Undertale, Halo, and Call of Duty, which all have absolutely insufferable fan bases, but I can still judge the games on their own merits.
Also, I don't give a fuck how pretty Death Stranding looks when you spend most of the damn thing walking around. I'd prefer to actually do something while I'm moving, thank you very much.
Well, there you fucking go.
But I've decided to play it for myself. After all, you don't judge a book by its cover, and you shouldn't judge a game by its graphics. So, how does this game hold up? Well, let's suit up and see what this game has to offer. Right off the bat, this game's graphics are unappealing.
Roadbreach, you just said you shouldn't judge a game by its graphics, yet here you are, judging the game by its graphics. And graphics isn't even the right term for it, it's just the art style of the game.
That's how my review format works. I start with the most obvious aspect of whatever I cover, and then I get into what isn't obvious upon first glance. And the art style for Among Us is dog shit.
Yes, we understand you don't like the art style, but the thing is, you literally just discussed the art style, and then you made it seem like you were about to segue into your next topic, only to basically restart discussion of the art style from the beginning. Point is, you don't really need to repeat yourself here, and you can just move on to the next topic of the review.
And bro, look, I really don't think you should be a judge of a game's aesthetics when you make incredibly bad drawings like this and that. Imagine a game that looks like this. That would be visually unappealing.
Oh fuck no, we are skipping past this. You know, the less said about Roadbreach's furry art, the better.
As for music, well, what do we got here? We got serviceable, stock-sounding tunes not worth mentioning. Let's move on. Brr, but you mentioned them anyway. I don't care!
Oh wow, what a knee slapper, dude. So funny. You should really do stand-up comedy, Roadbreach. You got the whole squad laughing. On a serious note though, it's kinda crazy that you say the menu music in Among Us is just serviceable stock music. That's not worth mentioning. Did you know that the menu music is based on The Thing? You know, that really popular horror movie?
Yeah, I've heard of it. And I'm very certain that watching it would be an infinitely more fun experience than this pathetic video game homage. Which makes it even more funny that the actual Thing video game is pretty good. Kinda like this is a retarded concept for a multiplayer game. What's next? Multiplayer stealth? Yeah, good luck with that.
I really don't know what the fuck that has has to do with what you were saying about the soundtrack, but also I really don't see how this is a retarded concept for a multiplayer game. I mean, Among Us isn't even the first one to do a murder mystery like this, but other games like Mafia, Werewolf, or Trouble in Terrorist Town from Gary's mod actually all have done this concept before, just in differing ways. Which, hey, if social deduction and murder mystery doesn't play to your taste, that's perfectly fine, but that doesn't make it a bad game, nor does it mean the concept is bad. And I also don't get why you're saying the concept of multiplayer stealth is bad either, when it can actually be quite fun. Like, my brother and I used to do 1v1s back in World at War, where it's snipers only, double health, and no health regeneration, and what we would often do is we would use stealth and sneak in the buildings and try to get the drop on one another, and it was a lot of fun doing that. But I digress.
It makes a lot of sense they do something like that, especially with how the imposter is supposed to look and how the game is meant to be played. It's almost like you can't really put 2 and 2 together.
Or it could be that the music wasn't worth talking about, and comparing this to John Carpenter's The Thing is pretty insulting.
He says while talking about the soundtrack anyway. You know, kinda sucks to suck.
The controls are abysmal. Every time you make a slight move with the joystick, you always go sailing off and smacking your stupid face into a fucking wall. It feels like I'm going to plow through the damn wall of this stupid spaceship because I feel like I'm traveling at the speed of goddamn light.
You do know that different lobbies have different settings, right? By the way, those lobby settings are horrendous. Why is the kill cooldown almost a minute long and the movement speed is ×3? That's ridiculous. Regardless though, you could always start your own lobby and create your own settings. It's not that hard. You're complaining about a non-issue that you decided to stick with instead of going to a different lobby that has different settings.
Actually, no, it is an issue. People regurgitate the same talking point when I say walking around playing the same tiny selection of minigames ad nauseum isn't fun.
It's a social deduction game.
Yeah, it is a social deduction game, and everything in the game is made to be ancillary towards facilitating that. But more importantly, what the fuck does this have to do with what Nier was just talking about? We were discussing lobby settings and movement speed.
And you agree these settings are terrible. Okay then why the fuck are you able to change them in the first place? Running faster in this game isn't fun because of the claustrophobic level design, and a kill cooldown of longer than 30 to 40 seconds is too long. If the default settings were fine as they were, then why are they adjustable?
Those aren't the default settings, you fucking troglodyte. The default setting is 1x movement speed and a 40-second kill cooldown. The lobby you were in is 3x movement speed and a 52.5-second kill cooldown. Also, the reason that you can customize the settings is because different people might prefer different combinations of settings. Like, I myself prefer 1.5x movement speed and about a 30-second kill cooldown. If the lobby that you're in has settings that you don't like, then join a different fucking lobby. It's really not that difficult.
This isn't like look sensitivity, text size, or anything that would make it more comfortable for one person. This affects the whole lobby. If a feature makes the experience worse, then why take the time to design it in the first place?
Because again, different people like different combinations of settings. Also, when the game has this many gameplay settings that you can tweak, it makes sense that not every single combination of settings is going to work well. Like, a longer kill cooldown works better with slower movement speeds and a higher number of tasks, while a faster movement speed works much better with a shorter kill cooldown. But really fast movement speed combined with really long kill cooldown? Yeah, that combination of settings sucks. But if you were to take either of those and combine them with different settings, you can make a really fun experience. You know, I never thought that being able to tweak the experience to your liking in a party game was ever a bad thing, but I guess Roadbreach is on a different level of thinking than the rest of us.
You want me to do my tasks, or do you want me to feel like I'm going to smack through the stupid wall of the spaceship?
Bro, if you're uncomfortable with the movement speed, just go to a different lobby.
No, don't have this feature in the first place. People want to drill it into my head that this is a social deduction game and not an action game. Then why does the game have features that make the experience worse? Slamming your face into a wall isn't fun. Halo Infinite has custom games where you can change the settings like movement speed, gravity, and infinite ammo. Even if it breaks the game, the maps were still designed around these features. It's an arena shooter where movement is key to survival, and the maps are very spacious. Among Us is a social deduction game where movement is a commute between different areas of the map that is claustrophobic. These customizable settings were clearly not meant for this game, and thus should not be in it.
So let me get this straight. It's perfectly fine when a game like Halo Infinite has a bunch of different settings for custom games, but when Among Us also has a bunch of different settings, it's a bad thing? Like, what the fuck? Like I just explained, when you have this many settings that you can tweak, not every combination is going to work out. I am 100% sure that if I went into Halo Infinite's custom games, I could find a combination of settings that makes the game absolutely miserable to play. That doesn't mean that they should be removed from the game altogether. You also say it doesn't complement the claustrophobic level design, but you also only show footage of the Skeld and Mira HQ, which, yeah, those two levels are quite claustrophobic, and I don't think a fast movement speed suits them well. But you also have maps like Polis, which are much more open-ended and would therefore probably be more conducive to a faster movement speed. Again, it really just comes down to the type of play experience you're looking for and then tweaking settings based on that.
Or make your own. It's not that difficult. Among Us lobbies fill up really quickly. They still do, to this day.
I'd rather traverse the Sea of Rust than make a lobby in this game.
Well, this is an under the mayo moment if I've ever seen it. You know, when presented with a potential solution to the problem you're describing, you say, nuh-uh, I want to continue to bitch.
But that's only the role of the crewmates. What about the imposter? I don't know. In every match I participated in, I was a crewmate. But I'm not going to keep playing until I get randomly assigned the role of the imposter, because f*** off.
So instead of giving the game an actual fair chance, you decided to just denigrate it even further because you never cared to play as the imposter. This is pretty much a completely unfair review at this point, because he's missing out like half of the game if he doesn't care enough to play more and potentially become the imposter. And I personally think that playing as the imposter is the most fun you could ever have while playing Among Us, especially if you're playing with friends.
Yeah, maybe because the same shit minigames over and over again, some of which I could find in a paper activity book, wasn't worth the minuscule chance that I could possibly get the imposter role. If 90% of the time I try this game is just tedious busy work, then I'm not going to be encouraged to keep slogging through it for that tiny possibility that I may get to do the one fun thing that this game has in it. Life is short. Too short to slog through self-inflicted tedium.
Number 1, if you're going to review a game, you should at least give it a fair shot and try to experience all it has to offer before making a review on it. Otherwise, you just come off as somebody who's willfully ignorant because they won't give the game a fair shot to see what it has to offer, which is exactly what Nier is getting at here. And then there's the other thing about the minigames. You complain that the minigames aren't really too interesting, but the thing is, they're not supposed to be. It's a social deduction game. The crux of the gameplay as the crewmates is to figure out who is the imposter before he kills everyone. The minigames are simply a means to that end. They serve two crucial purposes in the gameplay. Number 1, they give the crewmates a reason to disperse throughout the map so that the imposter actually has a chance to catch them one by one and kill them without getting caught. If the crewmates didn't have a reason like this to disperse throughout the map, then they would literally just stand in a circle, wait until the imposter kills someone, and then immediately vote him out. The other reason that these minigames exist is to actually put pressure on the imposter to actually get a move on, because if he waits too long, the crewmates will complete all their tasks and win the game. When the imposter feels pressure to get a move on, they might end up making a mistake in that pressure and get caught. The minigames are simply a means to improve the social deduction aspect, which Among Us is all about. Which, if you do not personally find that appealing, that's fine, but that just means that this game isn't made for you. It doesn't mean the game is fundamentally flawed or anything.
No, that just means that the imposter you're playing against is a bad imposter. Normally, when a match ends that quickly in Among Us, that means the imposter made a mistake right in the beginning and they couldn't make a proper alibi. Then again, there's no need for them to even make an alibi. You're playing in public lobbies, which are infamous for getting random people voted off if you happen to stumble upon the wrong people. It's also much harder to use the chat on mobile than it is on PC, which is why it's most preferred for me to play this on PC. Also, people getting good at Among Us is not a problem in the game. Crewmates are not exclusively the smarter players. The imposters can be really good too if they play their cards right. Sabotage the area to distract crewmates, hide the bodies, come up with an alibi, and you can easily win as the imposter. You wouldn't even know how to properly play the imposter anyways because you self-admittedly didn't care enough to play as the imposter for this review.
Maybe if the minigames were better, then I might be inclined to do that. You can tell me it's a murder mystery all you want, but it doesn't change the fact that most of the game is spent on unimpressive minigames that I need to convince myself to slog through to play the only good part of the game. I know that games will be repetitive if they stick to one genre, but the game needs to find a way to break up the monotony. which Among Us will rarely do if you play public lobbies.
You do realize there's more to do as the crewmates than just the tasks, right? A lot of the maps also have different mechanics on them that can help you catch the imposter. Like on the Skeld, you have the security camera, so if you see somebody enter a room with only one entrance, like say you see somebody enter the med bay, but then you see that same person somewhere else on the cameras later without first exiting the medbay, you'll know that they vented and are therefore the imposter. It can also be useful for verifying alibis that might be given during the meetings. Or on Mira HQ, there's actually a machine that will tell you if the other players are alive or not. So if you see somebody is dead that wasn't dead during the last meeting, you'll know that the imposter killed them and therefore need to go look for their body. That, or you can just try following different players around for a bit to see if they do anything suspicious, or to create an alibi for both them and yourself. As for when you're playing as the imposter, you don't even do fucking tasks as the imposter.
And the structure of the game doesn't allow for much longevity in the long run. The game's structure is just fundamentally flawed.
How is it fundamentally flawed? It's a social deduction game. Social deduction games can be really fun when playing with friends. If Among Us is flawed because of that, then so are games like Werewolf and Town of Salem. It sounds more like Among Us isn't your type of game, mostly because you're stupid and can't pick up on social cues, which was evident by the way because we recently played Among Us with him a few weeks ago, but that's besides the point. We're talking about his review, not the recent playthroughs we had with him.
I'm sure any shit game can be more fun with friends, because you can all commiserate with how shit the game is. But games like Concord, Anthem, and Crucible are either no longer with us, or have no online functionality because they were either repetitive or poorly designed, with Hit Squad not being far behind. And yet, this piece of shit is still with us.
You say that, and yet for some reason that doesn't clue you into the fact that there's something appealing about Among Us as opposed to those other games you listed. Meanwhile, Among Us still has a dedicated player base 6 years after it released and 4 years after it rose to popularity. In fact, taking a look at the Steam charts, the game has a 24-hour peak of 8,400 players. And that's only the people playing the Steam version. That doesn't count the many people that are probably playing the mobile version because, you know, that's the one that's actually free to play, the people playing on console, or people playing the PC Game Pass version, which, by the way, is the version that I play when I'm on PC. On top of that, you are talking about ironic enjoyment where you're just pointing and laughing at how bad the game is. Nier, however, is talking about actual, genuine enjoyment from playing a good game with friends.
Because if the game did something like switch up the minigames every round and or added new ones to make the variety better, then I wouldn't be so miserable playing it. And
you say this like Among Us doesn't already do both of these things. Every time you play as a crewmate, you're given a different randomized set of tasks each time. On top of that, whenever Inner Sloth adds a new map to the game, they also add a new set of minigames to do as tasks on that map. Sure, they're not particularly deep, but first of all, they're not supposed to be deep, and second of all, seeing as these minigames are only supposed to last like 5 to 10 seconds max, there's only but so much depth you can really wring out of these.
I don't think I need to be Shockwave in order to find playing the same thing over and over again with the subtext of a murder mystery to be an unenjoyable experience.
The reason why I like Splatoon 2 over Among Us is because that game actually provides a little bit of a challenge.
Again, what is with these comparisons? First Club Penguin, now Splatoon? Splatoon's not even close to the same category of game as Among Us. And yes, Among Us can be challenging. If the imposter ends up being really good, that is the challenge. Figuring out who it is and surviving.
Yeah, good luck finding a smart imposter in the fucking first place. I shouldn't need to gamble every time I jump into a multiplayer game for a fun time. Sure, any game can be impacted if you run into idiots online, but I've had far better odds having fun with other genres regardless of how smart my teammates might be. It's not imperative that the other people I play against are smart in games like COD, Crash Team Racing, or Fall Guys. It's another reason why I hate this game along with this genre.
Maybe this is anecdotal, but I find the exact opposite to be true in my case. Matchmaking kinda sucks in the modern Call of Duty games. It's not fun getting curb stomped in COD when I'm playing at the best of my game, only to lose badly because all my teammates are 8-year-old little Timmies holding the controller in their mouth, while my opponents are a coordinated team of sweatlords all spamming doing YY slide cancel with their sweaty-ass Dorito-covered fingers that probably haven't seen the sun in about 8 years. Now, I won't lie, it is annoying when I do get into a lobby of Among Us only for people to just vote people off at complete random as opposed to having any sort of rhyme or reason to it, but pretty much any online multiplayer game will have this issue. But at the very least, in the case of Among Us, you have a lot more control over the matchmaking, so if you don't like a specific lobby, you can very easily leave and join a different one. Whereas in a game like Call of Duty, you pretty much just get what you get unless you're playing private matches with friends.
Like, my guy, you've already lost the debate if you're comparing Among Us to games like Splatoon.
Do cry me several oceans. At least Splatoon isn't useless when I play public lobbies.
It provides constant stimulation, which is something that Among Us just doesn't do.
The stimulation in Among Us comes from the social deduction, which is the fundamental part of the game. If you don't get stimulation from that, then this game wasn't meant for you in the first place. Comparing this game to Splatoon is incredibly stupid, because Splatoon is not a social deduction game. It's a shooter where you have to conquer more territory than the other. So again, I don't know how you can make this comparison, except for the fact you're really dumb.
Or it could be the fact that the game will almost always be more fun due to the fact that I don't need to have my friends join in whenever I play it to have a good time.
Alright, first of all, fun is subjective. Second of all, you can also have a fun time in Among Us playing with randoms. Now, is it more fun with friends? Sure, but that's also pretty much any multiplayer game. In fact, when I was getting some clips for this video, I just ended up playing a couple rounds of Among Us with randos, and I had a pretty fun time. Once again, this is mainly just a you issue in the kind of games that you prefer to play, which, again, that's perfectly fine when you're not trying to argue that it's an objective flaw of the game you're trying to criticize.
And has far more variables to keep the game interesting. Things like weapons, sub-weapons, new players shuffling into the game every round, and different gear that changes the stats you have. Among Us has only one of those things. It's not stupid to want some fucking variety.
Among Us also has variety. In addition to the new players shuffling in and out like you already mentioned, you also have your tasks which shuffle each time. There's also the roles that they've added which gives even more depth to the gameplay, like the medic or engineer for the crewmates or the shapeshifter for the imposter. And of course a bunch of different map-specific mechanics which I mentioned earlier. Not gonna repeat myself here.
Don't for a second tell me that Five Nights at Freddy's or Undertale have a bad fan base when Among Us fans will come out of the woodworks and randomly blurt out its name for no goddamn reason. Don't come to me and tell me that Five Nights at Freddy's is try hard when Among Us doesn't try in the slightest.
You're comparing the Among Us community, a community that likes to spam Among Us when they see something that vaguely looks like a crewmate, to two different communities that are not only extremely degenerate, but are also notorious for having some of the most disgusting people within them, pedophiles included. You know that's why those communities get attacked so much, right? Because there are genuinely some disgusting people in those communities, and yet I haven't heard a single horrible person that's within the Among Us community.
Go fuck yourself. No, seriously, go fuck yourself, Nier. Of all the things that I would have expected from you, I wouldn't have expected whataboutism of all things.
Really, dude? This, of all things, is what you're getting super pissed off about? First of all, if you really want to throw shade at Nier, there are plenty of other things that he has done that you could genuinely do that with. But second of all, and much more importantly, that's not even whataboutism. You are the one that brought up the FNAF and Undertale communities, you fucking dumbass. You are the one that ran to the defense of the Undertale and FNAF communities, seemingly at random, even though they're really not relevant to Among Us, all because you wanted to paint the Among Us community as worse because they spam memes and the fucking crewmate and the word Amogus everywhere, I guess. Whereas, like Nier said, the Undertale and FNAF community are full of fucking degenerates, and as for several prominent figures in those communities being pedophiles, well, I can't really say when it comes to Undertale because I don't recall any off the top of my head, but it is absolutely true in the case of FNAF. Speaking of which,
you try to paint it as pedophilia is just something that's accepted within either community, as if they aren't kicked out and ostracized the second they get found out.
Oh yeah, totally, dude. They totally kick him to the curb. That must be why the FNAF community kicked out Jonachrome, a child predator, when he recently tried to rejoin the FNAF community, right? Right? they welcomed him back with open arms. Now, of course, it would be foolish to say that everybody in the FNAF community approves of this, but it's quite clear that there is a problem to be addressed in the FNAF community. As for the Undertale community, I can't really speak to if they have an issue with this or not, because, again, I haven't really paid attention to the Undertale community in a long-ass time, and that's for good reason. But between the FNAF community, which does that shit, and the Among Us community, which just spams memes and images, yeah, I'll take the Among Us community any day of the fucking week.
Like a former fan game dev, Blackout, or former illustrator, Pinky Pills, both of whom have been kicked to the curb once people found out what they did. You are literally using the relative privitation fallacy here. Not only that, but I managed to find some pedophiles in Among Us just by searching it up on YouTube. Should we use the group fallacy here too? No, because that's disingenuous.
Okay, but the difference there is that the people in the FNAF community getting exposed are pretty notable figures in the community, whereas the people that you showed in Among Us are literally just randoms in game chat. Now make no mistake, a predator is a predator and they all deserve to be— My lawyer has advised me not to finish that sentence. However, in the case of the Among Us ones that you've shown, they're probably just random people who might not even interact with the community meaningfully. Unfortunately, the sad reality is that when you have a game that's friendly towards children, unfortunately, the most horrible kinds of people are going to use that to prey on them. But it being random players doesn't really reflect on the community the same way that it does that notable figureheads in the community do.
And it still doesn't change the fact that obnoxious people are still obnoxious.
Yeah, but there's a huge difference between somebody being obnoxious and being degenerate.
Any fandom can have shitty people in them. So there, I explained why I hate this game in a much more thorough fashion and showed the dishonest arguments made throughout this video. Now you may be wondering why I decided to respond after 2 months, and to that, I say I decided to take some advice.
I do not plan on repeating myself when I tried giving you this piece of advice, Roadbreach. Grow a fucking spine.
Don't go out of your way to harass people I talk about. Thanks for watching and gotta zoom.
You know, I actually do kind of disagree with the advice that Nier gave to Roadbreach. Instead of telling him to grow a spine, he should have told him to grow a brain. But just like that, the video is over. So I guess the key takeaway here is that just because a video game is not made for you, it does not mean that it's objectively flawed. I mean, I don't really enjoy RPGs all that much, but I'm not going to say they're bad for simply being an RPG. And if social deduction isn't your thing, then that's perfectly fine, but you shouldn't try and dunk on a social deduction game for being a social deduction game. But anyways, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for more, and tell me what you think of this whole shit show. Anyways, that's it. Peace!